My name is Robyn Camp, and I am the Director, Energy and Climate for RTI International. RTI is a research institute. That's what the R and the I are, RTI International, working across the social sciences. I am here today as an alumna of many COPs, and more recently as somebody working with different countries around the world on designing carbon markets. And I guess by way of, I always feel it's important to say, I am also a member of the Climate Action Reserve family. I'm an alumna of the Climate Action Reserve, although it's been many years. But I had the privilege of helping launch the programs as Vice President of Programs at the Climate Action Reserve. But so delighted to have everyone join us today. I do live in Los Angeles. I had promised better weather. This is not in the forecast, but you are probably aware we like rain right now in LA, so we will welcome this after the wildfires that we had earlier this year. And you are really lucky to be here for this great and interesting conversation with this illustrious panel. And I was just tallying myself, estimating, I think collectively there's like more than 60 years of COP attendance at this table.
We are
And that's
old.
pretty hard to find. So starting on the end, we have Katie Sullivan, who is the Global Managing Director for IETA. And everyone is probably familiar. IETA is really a powerful voice of business in the private sector in the design and operation of markets. And Katie, in, dare I say, 20 years with IETA, I think knows, can tell you, has probably a long memory of like all the things and changes that have evolved and happened over the world. And she has really been a key force in development of markets and their role in tackling climate change. Here to my immediate right is Nathalie Flores, who is the Vice President of Carbon Markets, Strategic Accounts for StoneX Carbon Solutions. And before recently, somewhat recently joining the private sector, she served in the Dominican Republic government, most recently as the Director of Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation. And for our conversation today, she also serves as the Vice Chair of the SubSTA, the UNFCCC subsidiary body on science and technology advice, which is one of the two permanent bodies under the convention. And providing gender balance on our panel today is Rick Saines, who is Managing Director of Pollination, which, you know, his day job is leading this climate investment advisory firm. But he is also a pioneer in the field of climate law and a truly a widely respected advisor to governments, companies, institutions, and funds. And among the honors and recognitions he's received in his career, he was recognized by the President of France for his significant contributions to the Paris Agreement. So here we come together today to talk 10 years, almost 10 years after the signing of the coming into force of the Paris Agreement, to talk about the COPs, and specifically COP29, the finance COP, and what happened, what it means for each of us, and the road to COP30. COP30 will take place in November in Belém, Brazil. And, you know, it's notable, the last 3 years the COPs have been held in economies that have a lot of reliance on oil. And so just the location alone, I think we would like to hear a little bit about what that means and how that may affect the negotiations this year. So today we're coming together for a conversation where these panelists are at a table, but it really will be a conversation about the impact of what has happened, to learn a little bit more about the process, the COP negotiating process, what's going to happen this year leading up to Belém, and then what's on the docket for COP30. You know, also considering the Trump administration's decision to, again, withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. So one thing before we get into it, can I ask a show of hands, who in the room has attended a COP in the past? Okay. And so for those who have you attended as a party If you have, raise your hand. Okay, so a few negotiators, or as an observer. Okay, great. And then just out of curiosity, who attended COP29 specifically? Okay, so for our panel, a little bit about that. And Katie Sullivan is going to kick us off by telling us a little bit more about what happened at COP29.
I'm going to grab the clicker.
Oh,
No
let's
matter
see.
what happened. No,
Here it is. You got it.
but I'm also going to sit down because, as Robyn mentioned, I'm old. And I have, been to plenty of COPs in my time, but not as many as Rick Saines. So it has been about 15 years that I've been with IETA, not quite 20. No, Robyn, don't worry. I have been in the carbon market space, markets, energy, policy, finance for 20 years. So I've been tracking this space for a very long time across all markets, obviously North America, my heart, and internationally. I think I was really happy that you canvassed the room to see who has been to a COP and who hasn't. And I can tell you, in a lot of rooms where I've done the exact same thing, we have more people here who have been to a COP than majority of other events. So it's maybe a smaller but mighty and sophisticated audience here today, which is great, because we can really have quite a dynamic discussion. I am not going to get, as much as I tend to lean in that direction, into some of the, say, gorier details around specifically the Article 6 rulebook, because there is another session occurring at this conference that really delves into Article 6.2 and 6.4, right? So this will be more higher level observations, let's say, about where things kind of were through the petrostate, Sharm el-Sheikh, Dubai, Baku, right? And what we got in Baku. And as much as it wasn't a sexy one for many people, it was certainly a sexy one and good one for us in the markets, private sector space with the finalization of the rule book and Article 6, okay? So to take a step back, though, with IETA, we are around 350 members around the world, carbon value chain, across the board, right? The buyers, the sellers, the assurance, the banks, finance, and engage with governments all over the world. We actually came out of the UN process 25 years ago as Kyoto was being negotiated, right? And in the world of Kyoto, with the Clean Development Mechanism and other trading instruments, that is really where we started and then have grown, obviously, since then. As we were fast forward in the lead up to 2015 and the Paris Agreement, 10 years ago now, it was not a done deal at all that there was going to be any kind of provisions within the Paris Agreement that allowed for markets and international cooperation to help countries reach targets or enhance their ambition. There's a lot of work that was done in the lead up to 2015 to see this actually baked in and then gabbled through. And IETA was involved with many, many other stakeholders, including academics, right, and governments and civil society, right, and certainly other business groups, to work hard to educate and then help to shepherd through, finally, that Article 6, 2015 in the rule book. And then it took 9 years in order to actually get, in the Paris Agreement, and then it took 9 years to actually secure the rule book in order to then enter an implementation mode. I say that for background, and then fast forward during those years between 2015 and say 2020, 2021, where IETA was working with the University of Maryland. And this is what gives you a bit of, say, context and helps to realize the power and the need for these markets. So working with the University of Maryland under the Nationally Determined Contributions 1.0 that came out of Paris, we modeled to see what would be if all countries were to actually achieve their NDCs, the first round, if they were to achieve that only within their borders, no trading, so no efficiencies, cost savings that can be allowed for international transactions, right, international trading, only within their borders, versus if they were allowed to trade with, according to marginal abatement cost curves around the world, right? And it's the least cost possible. The cost savings that is unlocked through trading was around $250 billion a year by 2030. $250 billion a year by 2030. And then if you were to say, take that cost savings, you're going to do it anyway, put it into greenhouse gas mitigation, take that and put it into enhanced more mitigation, you're looking at between 5 to 8 gigatons, billion tons, that could be unlocked, again, through the power of trading. Obviously, this is a perfect world, right? But that gave us a lot of the key messaging around the narrative for why these markets matter to enhance ambition, okay? And I say that because this is more important than ever in a world where finance gap, because of US and other reasons, right, is getting bigger and more challenging than ever. Okay, all right, boop. I do have a few quick slides, but so with Baku, and I think we're just kind of more on the same page with, I'll flash through this, Robyn, okay? But in Baku, Azerbaijan, the two big things were finance, the new collective quantified target, right, for climate finance. And there was a lot of money that the Global South wants, needs, pushed beyond the $100 billion a year, previously a year from developed to developing countries. What came out of that was, let me do this. So that's the acronym is wrong. And new collective quantified goal. Then you had the Article 6 finalizing the rule book was top of mind, key. Then you had mitigation and adaptation we won't go into as much. So for the new collective quantified goal, what was landed on in Baku was, it wasn't nearly enough, but it's all that they could secure was $300 billion a year, right, from developed countries and a host of other potential sources on a voluntary basis with a view to increasing that every year. Hopefully that's the floor is $300 billion a year, and then increasing that to a $1.3 trillion a year by 2035, okay? So that was agreed in a nutshell. If you want to learn more, IETA has a lot of resources. Okay, so then the Article 6 was big. And it wasn't a done deal. It wasn't a done deal to the very, very end. And Nathalie can tell you more, and Rick and others. But we finally got the rules secured. So it now, in the world of Article 6, is game time. It's implementation time. And there is a lot on the docket that the UNFCCC has on its plate through Bellum this year, to the tune of about 30 to 40 major deliverables that they are now going to be working through with the Article 6.4 supervisory body. So this is the top down, and it is really critical, including on registries, deciding on baselines and additionality, methodologies, right? So it's big. There's a lot of heavy consultations that are underway. IETA is involved with, same with many of you that are going to be doing that. So the big one, though, really for the road to Bellum is updated NDCs. So 3.0 NDCs, this is Enhancing Ambition 2035 targets. And so there's a lot of parties that have not submitted those yet. And they are going to be doing so hopefully by the deadline of mid-September. COP is in November, okay? And so what we are watching for very, very carefully is how many of those updated NDCs will now explicitly point to Article 6, because some were hesitant in the past because there wasn't a rule book or rules of the game. So this is 1.0 map, 3.0, what will this, this is those that actually explicitly said Article 6 in their 1.0, 2.0 NDCs. How many are going to reference it in their 3?
Can I just make a really quick comment on that, Kitty? So it's totally spot on there. In addition, it's how many sort of buying countries, if you think of sellers and buyers, will feature Article 6, not just because there wasn't a rule book, but because the challenge of actually continuing the path of decarbonization becomes harder and harder to get the next incremental ton because the price per ton goes up. So, you know, the initial NDCs were just kind of, let's get it in. Do we need it for the next 5 years? No, we don't need to include that. Let's figure out what we're going to do domestically to achieve it. We're moving into a phase globally where that's just going to be harder and harder to have every country individualize their commitments and have them approach anywhere near the actual collective ambition that's necessary. So that's the other dynamic.
I think, Robyn, I'll pass it back to you, yeah, we'll make it more dynamic, but I just hope that that's helpful to kind of get a feel of the lay of the land right now.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. And Rick, I think you have raised potential questions for, hopefully we'll have time to get to later today. What would be bought? What would be sold? But next, we pass the mic to Nathalie to tell us a little bit more about, first of all, what's the substa, and a little bit more about where we are on this road to Belém.
It's on? Oh, okay. Yeah, very happy to be here in California, though it's so cold that I'm always cold, so I'm not a reference for that. But yeah, very happy to be here. Always fun to be with Katie in panels. So I don't know. I don't know if I stay seated or I stand up, because I'm very pumped. I want to say so many things.
Whatever you're.
Yeah, so first, I want to make clarification. So yeah, I've been serving as Vice Chair of Science and Technology of the UN Climate Change, which is the subsidiary body in charge of reviewing science and opportunities of technologies that can be ruled as a global policy. So I've been serving in the seat of the Small Island Developing States for the past 2 years. The mandate is of 1 year. And then last year, there was a decision for me to remain in office. And then the government of the Dominican Republic, along with the Small Island Developing States, decided to renominate me, and I was reelected. But I make the decision of transitioning to the private sector, because being famous in the climate scenario doesn't pay the bills. And I'm very happy that that was at the same time that negotiators were working on the new quantified goal on climate finance, because unfortunately negotiators fail to actually have an ambitious agreement to meet the targets of 2030, as Katie mentioned, and delayed the transformation from the policy side of things, meaning the governments that need to put what they decide in the global framework in their national circumstances to actually deploy climate finance. And by climate finance, I mean economic transformation, right? For businesses to operate cleaner. So that's delayed until 2035, meaning that our taxes, like what we pay to our governments, is not going to put forward until 2035 to actually have a climate finance scheme. So that's the translation. So that's why I decided that I needed to come to the private sector to actually deploy climate finance from another perspective. So in fact, since I was reelected in November, technically that decision is still in place, but the SEPSTA position is open to be nominated in June in Bonn in the first round of negotiations. So if parties come to an agreement, somebody else would take my place of moderating the process along with the chair. So now we have Uganda as chair, but during my 2 years of service, I worked with Harry from Holland, that is an expert on GHG emissions reporting, and served the seat of the European Union. And with that, I started explaining the whole thing, because as you see, the body needs two heads, right? So a chair from a developed country or developing country, and then the vice chair, and that happens also for the subsidiary body for implementation. So as I said before, science and technology first oversee all the science around climate, so from the reporting from the IPCC and other reports that the parties mandated to the convention either to put together or receive, and then that becomes an agenda item, and then that agenda item becomes a policy paper to be negotiated in in the science and technology body. On the other side, we have the subsidiary body for implementation, that it's the body that basically unlocks decision for finance mechanism. And by finance, I mean that if countries need to put together, for example, a gender action plan, because that's a decision that comes under the subsidiary body, that means that a global framework is given mandate to developed countries under the convention to fund under compromises to support developing countries putting together gender action plans. And then developing countries work with that under any of the funds that were created under the Rio Conventions, either the Global Environmental Facility, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and any other fund that it's born from the convention. Developed countries give the monies from that decision to one of these bodies, and then that is unlocked and implemented by a UN entity like UNDP, UNEP, or any other non-profit organization that it's under the framework of implemented funds for development. And then countries have somebody helping them to put together the gender action plan that they decided at the subsidiary body for implementation. For me, it's important to make that understandable, because people come, sometimes I ask to myself, what is the world expecting from me? Every time I reach out about these things or about the UN climate change or the process, because what we do is to serve for the process to actually deliver legal text. So in execution, I will be doing something if I was still climate change director, putting together policy and implementing in my country, but I'm not. So coming back to the negotiation process and going back to the bodies of one of the Rio Conventions, which is the UN climate change. The three Rio Conventions have a subsidiary body for science and technology, an SBI, and a conference of the parties. But what makes the UN climate change unique is that we have the parties meeting as parties of the Kyoto Protocol, which is better known as CMP, and then we have the parties meeting as parties to the Paris Agreement, as long as that sounds and confusing. So the conference of the parties is the ruling body of the Convention of Climate Change. But the parties' meetings as the Paris Agreement is the ruling body of the Paris Agreement. And with that, we go back a little bit to what is happening in the US right now. So the US entered one of the 4 countries that are not part of the Paris Agreement, including, ironically, Iran, just to give you an overlook of what that means, right? And that is strategic in one sense, because if we look back, the United States was never part of the Kyoto Protocol. And that's where I see opportunity, because then you have a state level, right, making decisions to actually deliver upon the UN climate change goals. And with that, I want to make clear that the US is still part of the convention, of the UN Climate Change Convention, and is still part of the Conference of the Parties, meaning that the State Department, which is the national focal point to the UN climate change within their Global Change Office, is still at the table of the UN Climate Change Convention and still have the mandates and commitments to the UN Climate Change Convention, meaning doing their reporting of emissions of the country and other commitments that the state is obligated from federal level to the convention. So to be safe, I like to clarify that when people want to, I mean, we have risk on the table, but when people start to be sensationalist, sorry, English is not my mother language, as you can sense, but when people try to be sensationalist about the fact of the U.S. leaving the Paris Agreement, I'm like, I'm not bothered about that. I mean, yes, I am, but I'm not. You know what I mean? So, and I always like to extrapolate that, because still the government of the United States have commitments to the convention. And with that, I want to say that I had the privilege of living in New York City in the first term of President Donald Trump. And I sensed state-level action by then. And I also sense from the aid perspective, because I was working for the secretariat of a negotiation group in New York, which is the Coalition for Rainforest Nations, and I sense aid was still deployed with a different tagging, right? So instead of using climate change, countries were receiving aid for environmental protection with other tagging, hence safety and security or border protection of small countries, but still was deployed to comply with the UN Climate Change Convention on their environmental protection. And with that, I want to be very clear, because every time we're reading the news or reading something, I mean, I was working for 55 governments of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and I was receiving aid. I mean, not me, but my organization. And we were still receiving support from the United States. So with that, I think it gives you a sense of these bodies that the convention has and how to engage with each body. But when we go to the private sector, before I close, because I talk a lot and I can keep talking. And with that, feel free to stop me whenever you want. But
You can imagine a hangout with me and Nathalie.
Yes. So to close, I always like to make the point that we have to identify where is our guild or niche when we go to the negotiations, because a conference of the parties can be so overwhelming, but at the same time so appealing. Like, everybody wants to go to a COP, and they want to be over there, and they don't even know what they are doing over there. Then you have private sector like IETA, which is focused on emissions trading, that they organize the guild to actually have meaningful engaging when it comes to a conference of the parties, but they have an agenda item that it's very clear, which for the past 9 years was the parties rule book, and driving change towards achieving the Paris rule book, and specifically for us to be able to have Article 6 today. And, I'm gonna give myself a palm over here, because we got the job done. Like, I was chair of a vice chair when we got the job done, because that agenda item was under SAPSTA. But most importantly, the convention, at the demand of the private sector and other stakeholders, have created spaces in which you can engage, right? So one is to accreditate yourself as an observer. If your company has an academic institution or a philanthropic arm, you can actually accreditate as an observer. It's a process that takes up to 1 year, but you can do it through your national focal point. That's one thing. The other thing is under your guild, either if it's IETA or any other academia. Carbon Registry also does that for California stakeholder, because we met at COP29 when they were putting together like the delegation for the California state from that level. And the other is engaging with the decision process. Like, don't go to a COP only for the sake of saying that you are in a COP and you're just listening to panels. I mean, go to listen to a panel if you have a deal to close. But for me, it's more meaningful that you follow up, for example, the guidance of giving comments on submission processes of the negotiation agendas of these bodies. Like, this is always published. So if there's, for example, right now, IETA was working towards giving submissions of views on how we can deploy climate finance under the new quantified goal on climate finance. For that, they were working with the constituency, meaning the private sector that is member of IETA, to actually make an actual submission under the framework that was published in the convention for you to do a submission. And actually, the chairs receive that submission, review the submission, put it together for all the parties. We do consultations with the party, and then we come with an agenda item that has your views already. And then your representatives can come to the table with the view of your constituency. So by engaging with the process, this is what I mean. because sometimes we lose track on what we're doing at a COP, but we have to understand that what we are doing at a COP is deciding a global framework for economic transformation, and with that economic transformation, extrapolating that to policies that are going to regulate our business towards a low-carbon economy. So I'll leave it there.
Just go back to the point you made.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I'm telling you, I can keep talking.
So, and actually, Nathalie, I do. So great insight in terms of how to engage, how to contribute to the process. And thank you for like breaking down the pieces, like how it all fits together. Before we pass the mic to Rick, I did want to ask you if you would take just 2 minutes and talk to us a little bit about Belém and Brazil and, you know, what they are prioritizing this year on the road to Belém.
Okay, so time that.
Okay.
So you stop me. So I have the honor of bringing StoneX officials to Brazil in February to meet the COP presidency. And the president of the whole framework, they have a CEO, they have the Minister of Environment, and they did that because the minister needs to be at the table defending Brazil's interest, right? Because Brazil is the presidency, but it's still a country that has needs, right, as any other. So we will have the minister, Marina Silva, at the table defending Brazil's interest, and then we have Foreign Affairs, which in the U.S. is a State Department, and then we have Foreign Affairs moderating the process for the parties. That means we will have the most important official in environmental matters at the table with the countries, fighting for legal text to be ruled. Brazil's priority are, this is very public, you can find it anywhere, but their priorities as a COP presidency, it's towards adaptation to climate change rather than mitigation. And this comes from, and this is more like an interpretation of mine, this comes from the fact that Brazil, China, India, South Africa, Russia, and the group that they have together are the largest emerging economies. And at the same time, they host most of nature of the world, specifically Brazil with Amazonia. And they still need to develop, right? So they have, and this is, I want to extrapolate this because for me it's important that people understand that a decision or an approach of a COP is not only because you decided to be the presidency of the COP. I mean, there's something behind being the president of the COP, and it's allowing your economy or your group of countries or your block of countries that have the same interest to gain something else around what you did. So when you mentioned petrostates, that also made me think of why Brazil has a priority adaptation. You saw petrostates, but they have actually the right to actually raise their hands and say, I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to be a COP presidency, especially because they need to financially take care of the whole COP logistic process, right? I mean, my understanding is they are going forward for nature, because we just have COP16 of biodiversity. Colombia also is on the table, and it's very close, and they have Amazonia as well. But you know, small countries, and any of you can differ with me or agree, I don't know, elaborate more, but developing countries, also, sometimes they aim for adaptation in their schemes because they don't have another option, right? They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the funds to implement mitigation, or they don't have even the land to actually be able to do so. So Brazil represents the group of the Latin America and the Caribbean under the convention as well, being the presidency. The Dominican Republic and Panama are vice president of the COP as well, under the whole framework. And if you see this from the perspective of the small island developing state, or Panama that has the canal, it's a hub on aviation as Brazil is, and it's in the middle of, you know, Central America and South America. My understanding is like the national circumstances of these countries urge them to actually adapt to climate change. And they are pushing a very strong agenda on that. And then we have work that is overdue, like what is going to happen with climate finance, because we cannot delay, countries actually transforming their economy until 2035. And that's my view at the moment. But everything can change upon the consultations that the bodies of the convention, either the chairs of one of subsidiary body or the president of the COP itself, because agendas are adopted like at the negotiation. So we can see everything changing from now to 81 days to the first round of negotiations in Bonn.
So, thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of work to be done, and definitely looking that Belém, the focus of the negotiations, will be a little different than they have been in these petrostates. So, we've heard about what happened at COP, a little bit about what's going to happen this year. Rick,
Yep.
We're looking to you as somebody who's perhaps of all of us most active on a day-to-day basis on the financial side of climate change and markets and kind of making this all work. And we wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit, there are some big numbers that are out there. There's a new scale of targets that we're talking about, this path to 1.3 trillion. Can you tell us a little bit, like, how does that actually work? Like, where does the money come from and go? And how do we turn those pledges into reality?
Okay, thank you. Great to be with everybody here. So, I mean, if that was there was an easy answer to that, we wouldn't be at a $300 billion agreed target and then coming up with the road from Baku to Belém to articulate what are the pathways to get to 1.3 trillion. But that is the process that's happening now, and the COP presidency will be issuing kind of like a position paper on the road and what are the opportunities. I think it's a huge wake-up call for all of us in two ways. On the sort of pessimistic side of it, it's that we are just wholly inadequately addressing a global crisis that is not about altruism. It's about self-interested preservation of prosperity and quality of life on the planet. Because, in a 4-degree world, there is no economic prosperity. Climate chaos is economic chaos. So we're talking about actually taking prudent risk mitigation measures to address something. Now, within that, as one of the former lawyers for NRDC once said, well, the money's not going to Pluto, so if you can invest the money into communities, into technologies, into the economy itself, there's a benefit side to that.
Is it going to Mars?
It may be going to Mars, actually, yeah. It may be going to Mars now. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Strike my comment from the record, please. Yeah, exactly. But there's a big economic opportunity, and it's just kind of how you think about it. Of course, there are incumbents and powerful petrostates and global interests that are not yet prepared to embrace the radical transformation of the economy towards, a harmonious one with the planet. But that is the trajectory we are on. That die has been cast, and the only question is, how far behind the deadline are we going to be? And every delay just bakes in further suffering of future generations and current occurrences of catastrophe. So, we're on that path. Now, the other positive side to that, after I just said catastrophe and suffering, is there are tools that have to be implemented. And I think the 1.3 is going to be the broadest definition of mobilized finance towards things that are, in line with reducing carbon. So renewable energy, infrastructure, energy efficiency, the whole suite of global technologies and processes, and investments in nature and smart ag and restoration activities and so forth. And when you add all those numbers up, you get to a pretty large number, but there needs to be a lot more. And so it's really defining the distinction between traditional development assistance from developed countries to emerging economies versus the global trends of capital flows towards climate solutions. And I think when you realize the flexibility or the broadening of the aperture that's necessary to contextualize 1.3, I think there is a possibility there. But there's a real need to manage that so that you're not cannibalizing one source of funding to just put it into a different bucket and then kind of double dipping or pulling from one to pay the other. So that's one thing. But I think Article 6, coming back to markets, Article 6, and the role of cooperative mechanisms, and that's the on-ramp for private sector in this crazy, arcane, process. That's the on-ramp. And so getting those rules right, having some clarity going forward, and we're right on the cusp of that. And what I just like to say is that the work to define good governance, good methodological approaches, rules-based markets is fundamental. And that same activity, that same imperative applies within Article 6, within Article 6.2 and Article 6.4, and it applies domestically within a country's own, cap and trade system or approaches, and it applies in this voluntary market. And those features of what good looks like and how best to incentivize financing verified activities on the ground that result in real outcomes is the same sort of playing field that we should be enhancing and working on and bringing those things together so that we have a much greater opportunity to create the scale necessary. And I think it's a really exciting moment, actually. And there will be some thought pieces put out, between now and the COP on the role of carbon markets to achieve that, the 1.3. It's not a panacea. It's not the only tool. It's one important tool. We need it all. So we cannot kid ourselves that markets are going to solve everybody's problem. They're not, but there is a really important role that they're going to play.
Yeah, and I guess a clarifying question is how do NDCs relate or not to this magic 1.3 trillion number?
Well, right now I don't think there's much connectivity to it because the NDCs weren't fashioned, that we're looking at today. They're not fashioned in light of that. This was a new COP decision.
Yeah.
That is a going forward decision. The really interesting question is what will be the impact on NDCs to be submitted going forward to integrate and contemplate the imperative of that financing, and what do countries need to be doing that they have control over to position themselves to be recipients of more capital flows. And it's not public flows. This is private capital flows. When you get to 1.3 trillion annually, you're not talking about public monies being moved around. Okay, we're talking about private capital flows. So what do countries have to do to position themselves to be safe and attractive destinations for that private capital to flow? That, I think, is where you're going to start to see NDCs kind of aligning with that.
Robyn, before I forget, can I just mention another thing that we won't have time today, but it's worth mentioning that for the first time at a COP, you started to see a lot of attention, so this is Baku, being paid to unilateral trade measures. So this is in the world of border carbon adjustments, or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, in EU speak, right? But there is a lot of, attention, consternation, questions. It's cropping up there, and I would suspect you start to see it get more and more attention to Belém and beyond. So I'm just going to plug it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also want to clarify about national determined contributions that the national determined contributions are the compromise that the countries have to the Paris Agreement, right? So these are the decarbonization plans of the countries. And coming back to the point of what is going to happen in the new NDCs that countries need to submit at this moment, like for host countries from the perspective of carbon, the project development and carbon stock, host countries needs to be very clever when they are presenting their new NDCs, because this is where the tagging for carbon projects and carbon projects development, it's going to come from, right? So if they want to unlock finance in bilateral agreements, that needs to be established in their NDC. If they stay working with NDCs from the first period that they have to present, then the only mitigation actions that are part of a bilateral agreement transaction will be the one detailed in both countries' NDCs. So that's also important to highlight, because sometimes the countries put so much effort together in these decisions, but I don't know if we as negotiators, as countries, representatives, are understanding the level of compromise in which we are obligating our countries, right? So for an NDC to be unlocked, and at the same time, Article 6 of the parties' agreement, both 6.4, 6.2, and 6.8, I mean, you have to go through a process of reporting that if we delve that in this moment, probably we don't end. So we have to present our national inventories. We have to present our NDC tracking. We have to present our biannual transparency reports. We can add a technical annex on the topic that we want, either forestry, energy, or any other mitigation emission factor that we decide that we want to focus on, a technical annex of a BTR. Then if we are working on forestry, we have to present the national forest reference level, the national forest reference emission level. And when I see all this reporting, because I was in charge of putting that together for my own country, I don't see that a part of the private sector.
Sorry to cut you off, but I think, and Robyn, sorry, but this is where we're going to pivot to the U.S., right? Like, this is the situation.
Yeah.
It's the elephant in the room. We all need to talk about it. And it's like, well, why do we go to L.A. for like a COP session, right? We all know what just happened. But on this, it doesn't get the attention, and Rick knows all about it. Yes, the U.S. pulled out of Paris, didn't pull out of the UNFCCC. What the real possible damage, right, certainly nearer term, is all the climate finance money that the U.S., and Robyn as well, right? And this is the GCF, and it's the GEF, and it's all this capacity building stuff that goes to all of these countries that are doing all these processes and this work and the reporting. It takes resources to do that. They do not have it in-house necessarily. They need that support through climate finance dollars, and a lot of that has or will be evaporated, and who's going to step up to support that? And that is a very serious issue, right?
And if we go back to the market, situation that comes from the decision, like you need, if you are putting together a project, a carbon project in any of these countries, and you want that to enter Article 6.4 or 6.2, it has to go through the whole process of everything that I'm trying to explain over here. And the convention needs to fiscalize, and I was talking with the policy team of IETA the other day about this, like the convention needs to be very rigorous to fiscalize the fact that all the countries need to have their inventories in place. Everything needs to, to work. When the convention evaluates the letter that everybody's talking about, but we are not going to go over there, but you need to go through all these processes that I'm detailing, and that means that if you're a project developer willing to develop projects under 6.4, 6.2, or even technology transfer on 6.8, which is non-market approaches, but at the same time it's mitigation action that needs to be hold accountable, then you need to go through all the process. And last, which was a question for both of you, it's like, I don't know if you ever think, sometimes I get myself, wondering of random things, including this one, and this was from your speech. We are talking about trillions, so countries are compromising money that they don't have. Because at the end, the money they compromise is taxpayer money, because they are part of the convention due to the fact that we pay taxes to our states to actually have a budget to represent us, right? So when a country says that they are going to compromise trillions, those trillions comes from the regulation they are going to put into place to actually do the economic transformation. So how many trillions have we deployed? I mean, has anybody
Yeah, that's
thought
true.
or account all the, like, the money that has been implemented?
We have to give it back to Robyn.
I know.
Yeah.
1992 to
Not
now.
enough, right? Not enough. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if I, just to sum it up, in an ideal world, like the NDCs would provide a roadmap for each country of what their needs are, what the investment is, and what the environment for investment is. And that would build the confidence to bring in the investment that would lead to the mitigation and adaptation actions needed. In a perfect world, that's what would happen. We are not in that world. As Katie mentioned, you know, like, a lot of the resources for that have just been fed to the wood chipper by Elon Musk. So I want
Yeah.
to ask the panel one question in a, dare I say, round robin fashion. And then we want to save 5 minutes to take questions from the floor. But Katie, as you...
Rick, please go to Rick first.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm
Okay, wait, so sorry. So
learning so
just
much
as
from
we, I'll give you a chance to comment, but the question is, as you mentioned, you know, and we talked about it a little bit, the U.S. is coming out of the treaty and the resources are going to be dramatically different. So what, to this navigating the American carbon world audience, you know, what is your call to action for this crowd in terms of providing a solution or filling the gaps? So Rick, starting with
Okay.
you, comment and
All
then
right.
answer the
Yeah,
question.
quick one. So I was honored to represent Fiji when Fiji held the COP presidency, small island developing state. Trump won. That in Marrakesh, the election was midweek. Fiji took the mantle, and then everybody expected Hillary Clinton to win, and everything was going to be on autopilot, and they were going to, you know, go every other year, and we were just on implementation mode, and then the world changed politically. We're kind of back to that. But one of the things that I'm so proud of, the leadership that Fiji had and Prime Minister Bainimarama, was to really recognize that it's about the grand coalition, as he coined it, and it's not just about the formal state actors. It's about everyone, private sector, subnational governments, et cetera. And what was a very controversial decision at the time, he made then Governor Jerry Brown his special envoy for states and regions, and he was part of the Under 2 coalition. And we took a lot of flack for that from some of the, you know, the apparatus, the UNFCCC Secretariat, and all the wise, you know, elders who had been doing this process, and we're now on to COP30. But as it turned out, it was really the right judgment to make and the right resetting of, like, who is part of the collective action challenge that we have. And it's not just about negotiators from countries sitting in rooms in various places. It's about the whole world coming together to solve the problem. So that is the enduring value of the COPs, is the ability to bring the whole community together. And I think, and I suspect that one of the features of this coming COP will be the prominent role that subnationals are going to play and be more embraced, you know. And that has particular arcane aspects to it in the agenda items and things like that. But more importantly, it's about convening the people together to talk about the solutions and then actually getting the money moving. So that's the call to action, is to lean in, participate in the way that you can, a little bit to your earlier comments, and, you know, watch that space, because I think the subnationals are going to resurface as an important constituency.
That's mine too. The Marrakesh, that was just a shock. Like, that was just a shock. Everybody was in absolute shock 2016-17, right? But you also had, okay, we are still in, and go back to. Now, maybe even more important than ever, but more strategic about the subnational, right, and the non-state entities. I think that you do not have a federal government that will help be a conduit to the world and the world back to U.S. states. They will need to lean on those of us, some in the room, who have international connections and relationships to help these states and cities and these non-state actors in the U.S. access the global arena. And that's not just UNFCCC and COP, right? I'm talking other multilateral fora that are absolutely critical. And back what's happening internationally to make sure that it gets drilled down and is accessible to some of those we are still in government, in particular partners in the US, right? So I think that's going to be very, very important. And again, I think it's going to be maybe more strategic and stealth, maybe not as flashy, but I think obviously more important than ever. And I also believe the UNFCCC, the Secretariat, might even be a bit more amenable, right, to ensuring maybe it's not a formal seat at that table with other parties, maybe it's something else, but there should be a lot of creative thinking about how to do that around the UNFCCC table.
Natalie, a call to action in 1 minute.
In 0 minutes. To me, I'm honored that I'm a Fulbright scholar, and that opened up my mind when I came to the U.S. because I was under a program of climate change and renewable energy in the administration of Barack Obama. I mean, they put together funds to actually for developing countries, people to come to learn from the U.S., right? And that was so like life-changing because I understood a state level, I understood federal level, I understood local level, and how the private sector interacts in the whole framework. And that's where my hope is in terms of the action that we need, which is very aligned to what both of you mentioned. I think that the role from the United States, even with what the federal government represents, like the real action is at state level, and that shows, and I think the world already knows that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I see the rising of this subnational action. I don't see it as something new because it was always there. The thing is that since we live in a world that has a lot of information and advertising and everything we need to do, it's very comfortable for the representatives to the convention, and by this I mean the national focal point, that in our cases are, in this case is the State Department, is just to diminish the fact that they can create an environment for a state level to have a place in the global process, right? Because now the process that the state level does is actually the real action. And that comes from the decisions that are taken. And I think that a little bit back to the point of the Secretariat, the Secretariat doesn't represent anything. The Secretariat is just logistics for the process. Actually, the voice is the countries. So the people that the countries put into place to have a role. And the Secretariat comes to service. Like I had in a negotiation 3 people helping me to actually be able to deliver what I have to do. Yeah. And by that, I mean that the Secretariat is people that we put together to help us talk to each other. So what we need to do is to, reinforce the way in which our countries use the Secretariat in their favor and what they bring to the table for what we need when we are in these processes, and that we cannot forget that negotiations is a process of negotiating legal text. You have people fighting over a comma in these gatherings, and we need to understand that's what is happening. And that comes from there, it's going to overrule what we are doing on the ground. So I think engaging from the same technology transfer and capacity building that developed countries do to small countries, bring it to the in-country. Because to me, it's incredible that you have initiatives like the Climate Reality that trains kids around the world on engaging on climate diplomacy, yet the American kids are not under that road. They don't even care. And that's an engagement that we have, that's an engagement that we have to do. If you have an education system that is discussing either to drop out of high school or going to school, instead of trying to go to diplomacy, then who is going to defend the interest of the Americans in the future? Yeah. So I think that technology transfer and education within the country is also important.
Very well said. I really appreciate that. Okay, we do not have time for Q&A, but I invite you, if you have questions, to come and approach the speakers afterwards directly. Is it a fast question?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'd like to, as a Brazilian, I'd like to bring kind of a testimony on what's being discussed for COP30, as a...
That is allowed.
Yes.
Basically, Katie said that the other COPs had clear assignments, right? And what's being discussed now is that this COP should be the COP of implementation. So how to make it work, everything that was set up and structured so far, because I can see the anger of many people and activists and social movements that it's too much talk and negotiations and no enough deliver. So I think we have to remember what's in the principle of the United Nations Climate Convention, which is who will pay the bill. Basically, it's already set. Who historically emitted most emissions, right, during the history. So what's being, like the main theme there will be, apart from the energy transition, which is already set, so everybody knows that you have to phase out oil and then invest in renewables. How can we protect the natural carbon sinks, which include all the biodiversity and everything that, so it's symbolic that is in the world's, greatest forest, right, for that. And we have the answer since the 80s, right, with sustainable development. This bill should be paid with the knowledge and the resources of the developed countries to make sure that the underdeveloped and developing countries can invest in those technologies and ways of doing business from inception in the interest of the entire Earth and not nations anymore. I come from International Relations Academy, so it's really exciting to discuss. This was the best panel so far for me, exactly because we need to go beyond sovereignty if we want to think about these things, and think how can we really gather, to unlock the necessary investments. And I can give you a very practical example. In the heart of the Amazon, what is happening is that people that live there, they go to cattle ranching and cutting trees, because they have no other alternative for survival, right? So if we really invest in bioeconomy, and regenerative agriculture, and of course like carbon farming, let's say, or protecting the forest for the carbon removals that private companies need to reach their net zero goals, we can get there, But we need, my question for you guys is basically, how can we unlock the necessary investments, both on the public sector, but also in the private sector, to bridge the gap that is being made by this current administration here? Because I can see how geopolitically U.S. is going to lose leadership by not doing that, and maybe Europe will try to bridge the gap, I don't know, but we need to do something. We can't wait, to 4 years to another government wake up and really work.
So do you have 3 more hours?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that I strongly encourage you and others to meet on the margins, and because that's the big question, right? I will say one thing. You're already seeing, and it's unsurprising, a pivoting of power, right? U.S. leaves, exactly right. So, and you have more that are filling in that vacuum that the U.S., and that'll occur for much broader than climate, geopolitical and reasons. I only want to leave one word, and I hate to do it, but I do have to give credit to Elon Musk. At his all-hands meeting last week in Tesla, I don't know if anybody saw it, he used the word sustainable abundance. And I think we should start using the word sustainable abundance for a lot of what we're discussing right now. That's all. Mike,
Hear, hear.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. And our panelists will be around, ask your questions. And thank you for our shadow panelists. That was a great way to end our commentary.
Thanks very much.
I think lunch is served. Yes, upstairs. Thank you to the panelists. I didn't properly thank you.